long before time had a name, the first Spinjitzu master... Nope. Alright, so you guys voted on me telling the entire history of Ninjago for the 2K special. And before I say anything, thank you guys so much for this milestone. And the history of Ninjago won by a landslide, and I'm gonna be honest, my intention was to tell it mostly to the specific detail, but then I had a comment that made me realize something. That Ninjago's history has been told so many times now, and it is fairly standard in the grand scheme of things. So, I thought I would tell the history of Ninjago, but in my way. But let's not waste any more time, and let's get into the history of Ninjago itself. Starting with, literally speaking, before time had a name. So things started around about 10,000 years ago, and all that there was initially was something called the Ethereal Divide. There is not much actually known about the Ethereal Divide. We don't know when it began, and we also don't know if it'll come to the end. And all it was a space between the non-merged realms, and now that the realms itself are merged, they now just exist on the outskirts of it, and there's not much else known apart from that. Also existing at this time was actually the Source Dragons, and through that time they created what is now known as the Elemental Powers. And during this time where the Source Dragons and the Ethereal Divide existed, at some point the first realm came to be, or it somehow already existed. It's not actually explicitly said, but the first realm is called that for a reason. But this land, like I said, came to be, and not long after, you would see the emergence of the other realms, and during this time they all picked their sisters. But just like that, all of this land and all these realms just existed, so what else is there to do than to have life on them? And weirdly enough, one of the first species of people to pop up were the Riders of Destiny, and they were the ones who still claim to this day to help guide the other realms' destinies. But the main thing that happened was that the Oni and the dragons were the ones that popped up in the first realm itself. And during this time, so did the first Spinjitzu Master, which were a hybrid of the two. But the fight between the Oni and the dragon went on for centuries, and the first Spinjitzu Master, considering he was a hybrid of the two, really was not happy with this. So, with the help of Firstborn, the one of the mother of the dragons, who can shoot every single element from her mouth, created the dragon armor and the dragon blade to end the war. And through this was a legend to come from it, being that if you own the dragon armor and the dragon bone blade, you would be able to control Firstborn herself, like the first Spinjitzu Master did. But unfortunately, the person who had tried to act on this legend was sorely mistaken. But the first Spinjitzu Master tried his best to end the war between the Oni and the dragons, and tried to exist peacefully with the two of them, but unfortunately he was not exactly successful. So, in reaction to this, he created what is now known as the Realm Crystal. But like I said, because he failed to end this war, the first Spinjitzu Master used the newly created Realm Crystal to escape the first realm, and leave that war behind, including Firstborn, which patiently waited for him to come back. And she was sorely mistaken as well. But the first Spinjitzu Master just left, and they didn't exactly know where he went, and the Oni in particular were very curious to see where he went, so they attempted to go and follow him. But it was around about this time that in the Cloud Kingdom, two new characters were born, one being Fenwick and the other one being Quanish, and they would have their own ideals and their own destinies to land on, whether that's for the better or for worse. This is the start of a period of time which is known as pre-Ninjago, where the first Spinjitzu Master arrived in an ocean-filled realm that was engulfed in chaos because of a massive water lizard. What made it interesting is that Wojira held control over elements of water and wind, which are the two elements that the first Spinjitzu Master could not have a control over. And he decided that he wanted this realm to be one of peace, so he worked with the Melopians and the Islanders, which were the initial inhabitants of Ninjago, and with their combined strength, they fought Wojira. And to be honest, they nearly lost. Wojira is a very strong combatant, and as a last resort, the first Elemental Master of Water, Niad, attempted to pry the Storm Amulet and the Wave Amulet from Wojira's head. But this was also unsuccessful because she simply was not strong enough. So as a last resort, Niad decided to merge with the ocean to be able to pry those amulets off, because with such a strong element, she would be able to finally do it. But this was a success, and the source of Wojira's power was torn away, and Wojira fell into a deep sleep, and she would not be awakened for thousands of years. But as a thank you to the Melopians and the Islanders, the first Spinjitzu Master gifted them both with their own respective amulets. The Islanders getting the Storm one, and the Wave amulet getting to the Melopians. And the first Spinjitzu Master peacefully parted ways. After this, he decided to finally create the land which would become Ninjago itself. So he forged 4 elemental weapons at the Temple of Light using gold from the Golden Peaks. And he imbued each of these golden weapons with their respective elements, being fire, earth, ice, and lightning. And using these weapons, he created the island of Ninjago, which does anger a certain Melopian, but we will get to that soon. But it was around this time that the first Spinjitzu Master was caught up with, and the Oni pursued him successfully to the correct realm. And because of that, they created what was then known as the Oni Temple. And I'm going to be honest, not much is known about the Oni that came into Ninjago. The presumption is that the first Spinjitzu Master was able to defeat those Oni quite easily, but he did have some help. Because one of these Oni, which goes by the name of Mistake, turned on the other Oni as she simply fell in love with the land that the first Spinjitzu Master created, so she agreed to help him in exchange to be able to live peacefully. And then these Oni were defeated, and the 3 warlords had their Oni masks taken from them, one being vengeance, one being deception, and one being hatred. And over time, these 3 masks were separated across the land. But during this time, all of this light that was given to this land caused a shift in the balance, and when the balance is disturbed, it has to answer. So manifesting itself out of pure darkness and chaos was the Overlord. And he was not happy with all of this new light that was given to the realm of Ninjago. So he declared war on the land itself and the first Spinjitzu Master. And this came to be the Stone Wars. But as the Overlord was spreading his darkness and his chaos across this land, the first Spinjitzu Master had to respond. But the Overlord was not exactly happy about that, so he created what was now known as the Stone Army. He also was afraid of the first Spinjitzu Masters to an extent, so he created what was known as the Temple of Fortitude, and it was a direct counter to the Golden Power. But the first Spinjitzu Master wasn't going into this battle with little to nothing, because the first Spinjitzu Master uses his Golden Power to create a dragon and a mech to be able to fight him off. But unfortunately, this was not actually enough to defeat the Overlord, because he was simply too powerful. So in reaction, the first Spinjitzu Master split Ninjago into 2 smaller islands. And the Overlord was officially banished to this dark island, and his form was destroyed while the Stone Army was entombed underneath the area that would one day become Ninjago City. And this ultimately left the final battle, or the battle between good and evil, undecided, and it would remain this way for thousands of years, until a certain group of ninja would attempt to stop it themselves. But the first Spinjitzu Master officially decided that this new land needed new inhabitants, and while it is theoretically possible that the first Spinjitzu Master pulled from other realms such as Chima, it is entirely possible that the humans and the Serpentine that exist in Ninjago simply came into existence like species did in other realms. But regardless, it was around this point the Serpentine did come into Ninjago, and alongside the humans, they colonized the land, building cities, villages, anything you can really think of. I will say for reference, I did also want to give more of a year reference like I did at the very beginning, but honestly, it is very confusing around this point in time when anything happens, so you're just gonna have to take the event as they come along. But it was around this point in time where the first Spinjitzu Master decided to bestow a group of humans with the power of the elements he has mastered, and this is the official first forming of the Elemental Masters of Ninjago. Around this time as well, we do know this is around the point in time where the first Spinjitzu Master and King Mambo promised a fragile peace between the humans and the Serpentine amongst a fear of disagreement between the two. Alongside the fact that this is when Quanish was banished from the Cloud Kingdom by his brother, and he officially has no memory of his life, and he became somewhat of a prophet within the land of Ninjago, but mostly he was known as a fool. And I'm going to be honest, this really is the time where a lot of stuff just happens to be happening, because this is also around about the point in time where the first Spinjitzu Master presumably went off and created the other realms. Because we know he did, we just don't actually know when he did it, but it's presumed it is around this point in time. And not to mention that because there were now Elemental Masters in Ninjago, this was around the point in time where the first Tournament of the Sources was organised by the first Games Master. But around this point in time as well, when the first Spinjitzu Master returned, he foresaw something called the Coalescence. And he sought out the first of the Source Dragons to ask them to distribute him some of their power so he could prevent this from happening. And with this energy, he created the 3 Dragon Cores, which were powerful enough to keep the realms in balance for enough of a period of time. But the first Spinjitzu Master needed to create a place where he could store them peacefully because he was afraid of someone who was evil to take over this power. So as a reaction to this, he did have the Temple of the Dragon Cores created, but he used it mainly as a place to store information to do with the Coalescence. In reality, he hid the cores in the Mother Garden, the Pinnacle of Crystals, and the Lava Waste, which is in the Wilderness. But like I said, that meant this temple was purely just to hold the information of the Dragon Cores. So he had murals that depicted the location of each, and he placed a spirit under the temple to be able to protect this information, and only allow a direct descendant to be able to access said information. But speaking of the Wilderness, it is around this point in time where the Forbidden Five, who were the Elemental Masters of the Wilderness, founded what is the Wolf Clan, and they were a group who studied the Forbidden Five's techniques. And the Forbidden Five created a new language and a magic called Theoraxian, and they, through this, invented Shatterspin, and this led to the corruption of themselves and said Wolf Warriors. In reaction to this, the Dragon Master Egalt and Rontu created something known as Rising Dragon, and this was invented specifically to counter Shatterspin. But this wasn't enough, and they didn't feel like a prison like the Departed Realm was good enough, so they travelled to the Realm of Mysterium and they requested the High Sorceress Gantalaria a spell that she spent all day and all night working on. But during this time where they were away, the Forbidden Five spent most of their time destroying their very own realm and killed anyone who opposed them, including all of the members of the Tribe of Tigers except for one. But this wasn't enough for the Forbidden Five, and they wanted to destroy every single realm because it was a means of conquest and it gave them a sense of purpose. But the Dragon Masters defeated the Forbidden Five when they came back with said spell, and they were officially banished to the Nether Space. But strangely enough, this spell that was created was not destroyed after the use of it, and it found itself just floating along and eventually became sentient, and it travelled the realm to find a sense of purpose for centuries. But now that the Forbidden Five were officially banished, a guy by the name of Lord Argus takes control of the Wolf Clan, and he continued to strive for its warriors. But he was a very curious person, and he started to attempt to perform a Shatterspin, and he was influenced by Zayden Kane to strike what is known as the Gong of Shattering, turning him into what is known as the Lichen King, and it cursed the wilderness, trapping it in a desolate space. And this Lichen King defeated the Wolf Warriors, who are now turned into stone in the process, and Zayden Kane had to leave the Forest of Spirits. But at some point after this, the Dragon Masters had to seal off the Shadow Dojo because of it, and they enclosed all the remains of the Forbidden Five inside of it. But let's make our way back over to the realm of Ninjago itself, where the first of the Sons of Spinjitzu were born, and that was Garmadon, who inherited the only power of destruction. But just after, we found that the second son was born, who came to be known as Wu, and he inherited the dragon's power of creation as well. And these two were made to represent balance, as they both had the counter to each other. And growing up, these two were told a lot by the first Spinjitzu Master of the history, including the Overlord. But none of that would really come into play at that point in time, and the two Spinjitzu brothers were mainly focusing on learning Spinjitzu itself, and Garmadon and Wu first successfully performed Spinjitzu as they were attempting to fight off bullies. And it's somewhere along this time as well where they did encounter Quanish, and they weren't exactly impressed to say the least, leading to both Wu and Garmadon referring to him as a fool from that point onwards. But again, after this is around the time where Wu and Garmadon discovered the first Spinjitzu master working on these scrolls of forbidden Spinjitzu. And Wu also encounters a serpent by the name of Asphira. She actually helped them because Wu and Garmadon were within the lands of the Serpentine, and Asphira asked in return to learn the ability of Spinjitzu, which Garmadon actually said no to, but Wu said yes. This was actually Wu's first attempt at teaching, and to be honest, he did it fairly well because she was successful. But unfortunately, she used this new ability to overthrow King Mambo V, the Serpent King. And Wu and Garmadon were not exactly happy about that, so they used Forbidden Spinjitzu to defeat Asphira. And she saw this as a big deceit because she thought she knew the strongest variants, which she clearly didn't. But she was successfully defeated, and Mambo V came back to power, and that fragile alliance remained. But Asphira was locked up for a very long time, and she was not happy with Wu, to put it lightly. But the first Spinjitzu master wasn't happy about Wu and Garmadon disobeying him, and in reaction to this, he had to hide the forbidden scrolls of Spinjitzu away, so they could not find it and use it again. But it is not long after this where the three of them actually move into the Monastery of Spinjitzu itself. And around this point in time, the Overlord, or the remains of him, corrupted a serpent that will become the Great Devourer, and he sends this serpent on a mission to corrupt Garmadon and put his plan into motion. And in an unknown amount of time between this, Wu and Garmadon one day are sat there sparring with their katanas, and Wu actually loses his over the wall of the monastery, and because of the father's disapproval, Wu does not want to go and retrieve it, but Garmadon does. And in the process, he is bitten by this young Great Devourer, and he becomes ill as the evil venom starts to affect him more and more, causing him to resent his father and Wu. But funnily, around this point in time, an older Wu will be sat there fighting the Time Twins. So that's happening, and we just never were any of the wiser. But in reaction to this, the Spinjitzu Brothers comics take place, and during this, the first Spinjitzu master does send Wu and Garmadon on a journey to find a cure for Garmadon's Great Devourer venom, but unfortunately, to say the least, they were unsuccessful. But we are getting closer and closer to the present day, or the event of the show itself, because we are now just centuries from it. And unfortunately, everything that's going to be stated for a bit now has no particular order of what happened. All we know is that all of this happened around the same point in time. Around this point in time, Yang invents Air Jitsu, and this of course is the ability for the user to temporarily fly. And during this time he also discovers the Ying Blade, and in an attempt to become immortal, he turned himself and his students into ghosts and forever cursed the Temple of Air Jitsu, or so he thought. This is also the time the first Spinjitzu master unfortunately passed away. He locked himself in his tomb, and that was the last of it, and his sons were no longer children. But at some point before this, he does leave a hidden message on his staff for Wu to be able to find his final resting place, and also to obtain the Realm Crystal. This is also around the point in time where Wu and Garmadon receive their kimonos with their protection spells against evil, and the idea is that this is probably given to them by the first Spinjitzu master, but it's not outright confirmed. Not long after the death of the first Spinjitzu master, he actually summons Quanish to the grasslands, and he offers to let him stay there. But Quanish himself actually denies it, claiming he has something left to do. And this is where he prophesies a battle where the acolytes of the first Spinjitzu master must face a terrible choice. It's around this point in time as well where Wu and Garmadon encounter Samukai, and this is where he was unfortunately defeated. Also around this point in time we know that the ancient tribes of the Serpentine unfortunately were dying, and the new era of the Serpentine were coming into play. These new tribes of serpents actually created the ancient city of Ouroboros, and it is where the Serpentine decided to study the stars. But around this point in time, the Great Devourer were growing bigger and bigger, and eventually was a giant monstrosity. But in an attempt to scare the people of Ninjago, the Serpentine did decide to unleash the Great Devourer upon them, as a warning for the curse of the Golden Master. But the people of Ninjago did defeat the giant snake and sealed him underneath the city of Ouroboros itself. This is also supposedly the point in time where the giant stone warrior was found, but I think this is just a product of early Ninjago not having a full context on what they wanted for the story. But it is actually around this point in time where Captain Soto and his crew fought against Nodokon and his crew, and it would be a battle between their ships, being the Destiny's Bounty and the Misfortune's Keep. And Soto was the victorious one and trapped Nodokon in the Teapot of Tyran, and he scattered the Sky Pirates across the 16 realms. We don't actually know how he does this, but presumably there was a way that Soto was able to get away with it. But Soto at this point in time felt victorious, and he gained his attention to something known as the Island of Darkness. And in a search for this island, Soto accidentally crashes into the coast of Ninjago, and that was the end of him and his crew. And towards the end of this period of time, all we know is that some more stuff was just created amongst Ninjago. One of them being the royal family, the kingdom of Shintaro, the Green Ninja prophecy was written in the Cloud Kingdom by this point. A lot of things just came to be, including also Imperium. But this marks the end of the point in time that's just a bit more vague. But this does lead us to a time 60 years before the event of the show, and it takes place in something called the Netherrealm, and this is where Zane was banished and sent back in time, where he encountered a Formling by the name as Vex. Vex was a Formling and the only Formling to not be able to achieve his animal form, and he was resentful of his tribe because of it. And because Zane at this point in time was trying to repair his Titan mech, he actually interfered with Zane and caused his memories to be erased. And Vex made Zane to believe he was the rightful ruler of the land, and Zane overthrows the king for Vex himself. This leads to the creation of the Ice Warriors, the Ice Emperor, the Blizzard Samurai of course, and it led to decades of torment for everyone else in this realm. This led to a very dark time to say the least, because Zane attacked the Formlands, he attacked villages, he attacked the Yeti, all of these different tribes in the name of Vex. But unfortunately, he was successful, and because of this, this realm laid in eternal torment until a certain group of ninja turned up sometime later. And it was also around this point in time a couple of important characters were actually born. We had Moro, Raz, Beatrix and Zeatrix, all of them taking on their respective destinies. But this leads us to just before and the Serpentine War itself. And the first thing that happens, which is about 40 years before the event of Hands of Time, Dr. Julian builds Zane, the first Nindroid, and builds the Falconer's companion. Garmadon finds himself training under Master Chen and Klaus, and later Garmadon gains the title of Lord because of this, and also deceives Wu and tricks Misako into believing the love letter they gave him was actually from him. Wu officially has his second take on teaching, and he finds Moro at the Monastery of Spinjitzu and chains him as he discovers he's the Master of Wind. Moro did believe he was going to become the Green Ninja, but unfortunately, fate had a different task for him, and Wu believed he was going to become it, but Moro now blames him for not being able to take on the mantle. This does lead Moro down a frenzy where he had to prove he was the Green Ninja, including the attempt to find the first Spinjitzu Master's tomb, but unfortunately, he met his fate because of it. But tensions all around were just continuing to grow, and the Serpentine were afraid of the Golden Master, and Chen decides to take advantage of this situation, and he tricked both sides into attacking each other because of it. This does cause the Serpentine tribes to unite and fight against the humans, but unfortunately, this was not good for them. And this officially marks the beginning of the Serpentine War, and Garmadon initially decides to defect from Chen to be able to fight alongside his brother, but before he leaves, Chen actually tells him about the Forbidden Five, and gives him an amulet and a map to the wildness. Garmadon in reaction tells Wu about the power of the Forbidden Five, and claims they would be able to help them win the war, because Garmadon didn't believe that the Elemental Alliance would be able to win, but Wu tells him to have faith. But Garmadon refuses, and decides to use the amulet to travel to the wilderness. And this is where he travels to the wilderness and actually finds the Shadow Dojo, and actually believing that Chen deceived him, he picks up the mallet and throws it in a fit of rage, but it caused the gong to ring, and it sends him flying away from the dojo. This is where he learns about Shattered Spin and the Forbidden Five, and is also warned against it, and is advised to, while teach children the ways of their ancestors, also to be able to take the gong and the hammer away as far as possible. But Garmadon actually uses the Shatter Spin technique to trap them in the rubble. And this is where Garmadon actually learns about the Forbidden Five and about Shatter Spin itself. And in reaction, he learns about how he should be taking away the gong and the mallet and keep it as far away as possible from the Lycan King. But Garmadon ultimately leaves the Shadow Dojo and moves back to Ninjago to help alongside the Elemental Alliance. And this is where Garmadon, Wu, and the Alliance fight the Serpentine. This is where during one of their battles in the Birchwood Forest, Garmadon faced up against Mogra, who actually turned against the Alliance as he decided to become a king. But the warrior was defeated by Wu and Garmadon, and he was presumably executed. But this is around the point in time where Garmadon realizes the potential of the Sacred Flutes, and the Elemental Masters construct multiple to be able to counteract the Serpentine, and it allowed the humans to win the war, and the Serpentine were ultimately locked away in their tombs. The Anachondrite generals from this war were also banished, but to the Cursed Realm instead, and Chen and Klaus were banished just to an island far off of the coast of Ninjago. But this officially marked the end of the Serpentine Wars. But a new battle would arise because of it, which was known for the Battle of All Time, where the Time Twins betray Wu and Garmadon and they attempt to take over Ninjago because they believe they had the most powerful elements. But in reaction to this, Ray and Maya construct what is known as the Time Blades out of a material called Chronosteel, and Wu and Garmadon use them against the twins to absorb their powers, and using said powers, they banished a crux at the same time. But funnily enough, as soon as they did this, the Time Twins from 40 years in the future came back to defeat the Elemental Alliance once and for all, and using the help of the Vermilion, they thought they were going to be successful. But this wasn't until they realized that Kai, Nia, and the future version of Wu did follow alongside them, and they were able to get the Time Twins out of this point in time. And in reaction, the Wu, Garmadon, and Elemental Alliance used obscurity to forget these alterations, and so they didn't acknowledge it actually happened. But if you do want to make things extra confusing, this is where the original Crux actually re-emerges from that temporal rift, and he begins to plot his revenge on Ray and Maya. But he didn't realize the reversal time plate came with him, but Ray and Maya themselves did, and they hid it away in the boiling sea. But that was the end of the battle for all time, and the Elemental Alliance for the most part were able to finally be at peace. The Elemental Master of Lightning and Cliff Gordon went on their honeymoon, Garmadon married Masako, and the Serpentine City of Ouroboros was officially abandoned. But it was actually around about this point in time where someone by the name of Milton Dyer decided to be the creator of the video game Prime Empire, but he goes into hiding after the disappearance of his latest game tester. But more of that later. But it was also around this point in time where Raz, who was still in the wilderness, travelled over to Imperium to visit the Emperor. This is where he presents to the Emperor the idea of an unlimited energy source, which was the Source Dragons, but they ultimately rejected this, but Beatrix actually somewhat liked the idea, and began to plan to overthrow him with the help of Raz. They successfully were able to tamper with the hover chariot that Levo actually used, but this resulted in an explosion that instantly took his life in a tragic crash, and the two acted like they had nothing to do with it, and somewhat got away with it. But Beatrix did successfully become the Empress of Imperium because of this, and anyone who was against her, including Beatrix, was banished from the kingdom, and she officially forged the Claws of Imperium, which were a team dedicated to hunting down dragons. But again, more on that later. But this does officially bring us into a recent history, but it does actually start with Lily training with Wu, and she uses the training to visit the Shintaro Mountains and defeated the Dragon Griefbringer, and she gifts the Blades of Deliverance to those local inhabitants, being the Geckles and the Munts. But her fighting days didn't last long, because even though Zane already existed at this point, officially born was Cole, Jay, Kai, and Nia. Also for reference, I will say this is around the point that Gio was also born, but more on him again later. But 2 years after the birth of these ninja, we do know that Nia was also born. And weirdly enough, around the same time was the beginning of what was known as the Ninja Ball Run, which became an annual tradition within the land of Ninjago. But then after all this happened, around this point in time was the birth of Lloyd Montgomery Garmadon, the future Green Ninja. But it was also around this point in time, presumably, where the battle between brothers will be taking place, where Garmadon officially succumbed to the evil that was in his veins. And because of the battle we do see in this mini-movie, it does cause Wu to realise that Garmadon will stop at nothing to have the golden weapons. So as a reaction, Wu hides them all away across the land of Ninjago, each of them guarded by an elemental dragon. But Wu then creates a map with each of the weapons, and he needed to give it to a trustworthy friend to be able to hide away, which was revealed to be Rei. But it's around this point in time where all the ninja were just able to grow up. Kai and Nia placed counter shots. This was also around the point in time where Zane was given his ice powers. A lot of things do happen in this time. But this is also the time where Crux enacts the next part of his revenge, being that he kidnaps Rei and Maya. And obviously at this point in time, Kai and Nia believe they are officially dead. This is also around the point in time where Dr. Julian actually passes away, and in reaction he erases Zane's memories, and Zane becomes an orphan because of it. But Dr. Julian wasn't dead for long, because Samakai resurrects him and tells him to construct the Skulkin vehicles for him, and use his son as a ransom. But the Serpentine trap him in a lighthouse island off the coast of Ninjago, and it was guarded by a Leviathan. And when Dr. Julian eventually constructs those vehicles for him and believes he's officially going to be free, the Skulkin do not release him, and he is left there for a long amount of time. But let's go back to the kingdom of Shintaro, where the lowly go on a quest to retrieve the skull for King Vangelis, and they get sent to the bottom of the mountain because they find out the true intentions of said king. But Vangelis does successfully take over the dungeons of Ninjago, and uses the skull, and forces the geckos and the monks to mine Vengestone for him after stealing their blades that was given to them by Lily. But this then leads us to the event of the pilot, or more specifically around 5 years before, because this is where Masako officially realizes that the destiny of Lloyd was going to be as the Green Ninja, so she drops him off at Darkley's boarding school, so she can go away and prevent this destiny from taking place. However, she did keep in touch with him through letters, but Lloyd does come to resent her because of it, but ultimately, she was actually unsuccessful. Also, just to be able to put this here, we don't actually know specifically when Wildfire, Aaron, and Sora were born, also Euphrasia now I think of it, but it's presumed around this point in time, this is where they were born. But there's nothing to be sure of, but this is going to be put here because we're going into the current era. And like I said, this is the era, because this is officially where the pilots take place, and then it's the mini-movies, and then it's season 1. Now the thing is, I'm not going to explain everything that happens in every single episode of Ninjago, because this video will probably be 3 times as long, but I'm just going to assume that you've watched Ninjago and you love it just as much as I do, so you're already aware of these events, but I will say what happens between them. So like I said, after the events of season 1, a couple of things does happen, including Wu informing Gale Gossip and the citizens of Ninjago about the Serpentine being the cause of the Great Devourer, and Harumi officially being adopted by the royal family of Ninjago. But this is officially where season 2 comes into play, and we see the event of the final battle. But after it, this is where Cyrus Borg emerges and turns Ninjago City into a more futuristic metropolis, with new technologies and becoming New Ninjago City. But the thing is that the Borg Tower was built on top of where the Overlord was defeated, and the Overlord's spirit was able to survive because he infiltrated the Borg industry systems, and he transformed himself into a virus. But it was also around this point in time where the newly good Garmadon was given an official pardon by the Emperor of Ninjago, because all the crimes he committed while he was evil was discounted in the event of his new transformation. But this angered a certain princess by the name of Harumi, because she believed that he officially abandoned his evil ways, and she viewed his current state as a shadow of his former self, and she actually gave up on her goals for the most part. In light of his new goodness, Garmadon actually built himself a monastery and assumes a pacifist ideal because he no longer believes in violence. And the ninja, Wu and Nia, actually find themselves having nothing left to do, so they actually become teachers at what is now known as Wu's Academy. And again, unfortunately speaking, Dr. Julian passes away for the second time, but this time, he actually stays dead. And again around this point in time with New Ninjago City, Cyrus Borg created 16 individual variants of Pixel. However, the one that we all know and love is the final one, and is the one that worked in Borg Tower. During this period of peace as well, it's also noted that the Serpentine secretly freed themselves from the Stone Army tomb, and again, like Garmadon, became pacifists to atone for their evil ways, and they all actually settled down, including Scales, who marries Selma. But Lloyd is the only one out there continuing to fight, and he's using the Ultra Dragon to stop a group of renegade Venomari. And after this is where Lloyd realizes that the Ultra Dragon wants to go home and rest in the first realm itself, and Lloyd lets him go back home, where he's captured and killed by Iron Baron and the Dragon Hunters. Oops! And of course, this is where the event of Rebooted actually take place. But of course, after now Zane has been presumably killed, the ninja, after their nice little speech at Zane's funeral, go for dinner at a place called Chen's Noodle House. But they're actually kicked out after Jay and Cole get into a fight over Nia. And this officially divides the ninja, and Lloyd is the only remaining one who's actually in motion after Zane's sacrifice. Even though Ninja never quits, Lloyd is the only one that actually stuck to it. And this is where Cyrus Borg is the one who takes the golden armor and hides it away in what is presumably Hiroshi's labyrinth. But each of the ninja just attend their own lives. Kai starts to attend fights, Jay becomes a game show host, Cole becomes a lumberjack, and all of the future tech from Rebooted was actually removed, giving it a nice blend between old and new. And this was also because of the fact that the digital virus of the Overlord. But Zane was not actually dead, however, because he rebuilt himself using the consciousness of the Borg Tower. But him and Pixel not long after this were captured by Ronan and sold to Master Chen, where his powers were stolen and Pixel was scrapped. And Season 4 officially takes place, and the Second Serpentine War was began, and then it ended at the same time. But in reaction to the Serpentine War and Garmadon's sacrifice, obviously his face was built in the Corridor of Elders, which means he officially created his dream, which was leaving the world of Ninjago in his own image. At this point in time as well, the Falcon was upgraded alongside Zane to give him more of a metallic exterior. But also, the ninja had another encounter with Ronin, and he ultimately abandons them in some sort of precarious situation that we don't outright know. It is presumably the event of Shadow of Ronin, but we don't know the canonicity of it. But the only other thing that really happens in this period of time is that Garmadon's monastery was rebuilt after its destruction by the Nindroids, but it was rebuilt into Steep Wisdom, where Wu was intended on retiring. But ultimately, then Season 5 happened. The only thing that really happens between Season 5 and 6 is actually the fact that Harumi begins to form the Sons of Garmadon, as her passion for revenge is slowly returning, and she begins to study the Oni and recruits Kilo. This is where the event of the Realm of Shadows takes place, but this then leads us to the time between then and Skybound, and this is where the Jin known as Aracor actually leaves Ninjago on a long quest to another realm. But again, more on him later, because this is then where Skybound takes place, and well, that depends on whether you believe Skybound actually takes place. That's technically an alternate timeline. What you could really say is that the ninja became famous, and Jay and Nia reconcile for some precarious reason that only they seem to know. But after the event of Skybound, you will find that Aracor actually does return to Ninjago, but it's only to find that the entire realm is actually destroyed. But he does find one grain of sand, and he keeps this grain in a necklace as he uses it as the remains of his former realm. But this is where the Dark Island trilogy takes place, and then Day of the Departed happens not long after, but then a little something called Pythor's Revenge takes place after that. I will say, just to quickly explain this, Pythor does try to steal a Borg watch, and he wants to leak it to gain attention, but ultimately it turns out to be a fake, so if you didn't know that happened, that was a thing. But then Hands of Time actually does take place. But after the event of Hands of Time, of course Master Wu is officially missing, but he is sat there aboard the Iron Doom, fighting the Time Twins and de-aging into a baby. But a couple things happens, mainly Lloyd going through puberty, getting a deeper voice and also getting green eyes due to a power increase, and also Zane acquires a holographic cloak ability so he can look human. But Lloyd does go in to try and find Wu, but unfortunately it is actually Masako who finds Wu, but she is kidnapped by Harumi in reaction to this. The only other main thing that happens in this point in time as well is that the mechanic does escape from Kryptarian prison, but that obviously comes into play because of Season 8. But speaking of Season 8, this is where that season does take place, and of course immediately after it is the event of Hunted. But after the event of Season 9, Ninjago is officially liberated, but Harumi meets the Overlord within his domain, and she accepts to rejoin him for his plan of revenge. So the Overlord successfully resurrects her and gives her a crystal to go to the Oni temple with. But Lloyd around this period of time does go looking for the remains of Harumi, but of course he was unsuccessful, so he has remained confused about this, obviously not finding out what happened for a long period of time. But Harumi does successfully become the Herald of the Overlord, and she begins on her quest to find a nearly endless supply of Vengestone. This is where those mini-movies of the Tales of the Monastery of Spinjitzu take place, where we see obviously stuff like Cole using the Earth Driller, Wu giving the ninja a refresher on the philosophy of Spinjitzu, and stuff like that. But nothing too important this time, apart from the fact that of course the monastery was rebuilt. But this then of course leads into the March of the Oni, and the official Oni invasion. But after this takes place and they were successful, Pixel does begin to work on a hangar bay underneath the monastery for around 6 months with the help of her ninjoids called Mini-Pix. And the ninja are nothing at all aware of this because by this point in time they're content and they become somewhat lazy. Also around this point in time, the Sons and Garmadon actually do break out of Crypterium Prison, and they wreak havoc on everything until they're arrested by the ninja. But a couple months later, they are freed from Crypterium Prison again by Mogra, who would later make them into the Red Crows. And again around this point in time, Quanish was again summoned to the Grasslands by the first Spinjitzu Master, but this time he does actually take him up on his offer and officially leaves his mortal body behind. This is then when the Garmadon comics take place, but then not long after that again, we do see season 11 take place, and then after the liberation of the Netherrealm, you do find that the Fire Fang does survive and finds refuge in the Lake of Fire. And I bring this up because Fire Fang actually starts to get worshipped and a cult starts to form known as the Fire Fiends. But around the same time as well, Wu does tell the ninja about the adventures of him and his brother Garmadon when they were young. But in this time of peace, the mechanic re-escapes from Crypterium Prison, which does lead to the events of Season 12 and the Prime Empire shorts. But there is one thing that does happen between Season 12 and 13, being that Harumi on her quest does begin to buy Vengestone from King Vangelis, which does cause him to be a bit more harsh on his slaves. But then of course Season 13 does take place and the king is officially off of his throne, so Harumi does start to look for Vengestone elsewhere. But between Season 13 and 14, Wu, Masako and Clutch Powers do actually head to the island of the Keepers, where they are successfully captured. And this is also where Ronin does begin to start his little scam ring, where he starts scamming the same Keepers, but he's eventually discovered by the ninja. But hey, do you remember that massive water lizard known as Wojira? Yeah, well this is around the point in time where she regains the Wave Amulet because of a certain other Melopian. But again, another block of seasons do take place because of this. This is where the island happens, the Virtues of Spinjitzu short happens, and then Seabound happens. But then of course, that leads to the event of after the Great Flood of Ninjago. Yeah, this is where the ninja do engage in a lot of smaller battles, including one against Soto, who was back on the seas. But after they defeated him, Jay found himself staying on the island with the lighthouse that Zane's father was once in. The ninja do find themselves freeing a Leviathan that was trapped in the sewers of Ninjago, and this is where Zane realized that it was the son of the same Leviathan that he freed from his father's island. This is also the ninja's first official encounter with the small-time villain known as Misdemeanor, and they do defeat her and her henchmen, but they're actually being spied on by Harumi. But overall, this is around the point in time where Kai, Jay and Lloyd all decide to actually quit being ninja. And Kai in reaction opens up his own fighting dojo, Jay just stays at the lighthouse like I said, and Lloyd becomes a window washer because he simply doesn't trust himself anymore. But the ninja were just nowhere really to be seen because Zane also turned off his emotion meter and the ninja just fell off for the most part. But because of this, the new Ninjago mayor actually does find himself appointing 5 new people to become the replacement ninja. And this actually leads to the government not liking the ninja because they start to see that these new ninja were doing it presumably better, but we all know they weren't. But again, around this point in time, Pythor was eventually found after a long time, and he was captured by the new ninja and subsequently imprisoned in Crypterium Prison. But Nia just being merged with the sea, it's been so long she's actually forgotten her human memories, and she doesn't even remember her own name. And Benthramar somewhat acknowledges this and actually quits looking for her. But this then does lead to the event of Crystallized, and by all accounts, the technical ending to the original run of Ninjago. But that is not where it ends, because we do have a couple of things that does happen. Mainly being the Ninja 2 all go out and rediscovers their powers through their own individual needs. And the team does reform because of this. But this then leads up to the build up and the merge itself. And this is of course the event of Dragon's Rising Season 1, flashbacks and all. Then of course the Elemental Mech shorts are the next thing that happens up. Then we do see the events of Dragon's Rising Season 2. But that about explains the entire history of Ninjago, and I do want to know if you guys enjoyed this video. Because like I said, those are the main events of what happens within this universe that aren't explicitly shown in each of the seasons, and I'm assuming you've watched the seasons if you were curious about the other parts of the history. But let me know if I did actually miss anything, because for the most part I do believe I found everything that happened between the seasons. But just like that, that is the video. And once again, I do want to thank you all for 2,000 subscribers. It really does mean the world to me. And I will say, if you have made it this far, you are an absolute legend. But I won't waste any more of your time. So just like that, thank you guys for watching. I do hope you enjoyed. Take care. Okay.